All right, in this lecture, we're going to be talking about the basic tools you'll be using throughout this course as far as software goes, okay? So in Procreate, things are going to be set up a little bit differently in Photoshop. So I'm going to do 2 lectures, one that shows you where these things are in Procreate, and then one that shows where they are in Photoshop. Now, if you're not using either Procreate or Photoshop, you're going to have to just be a little bit more familiar with your own software, and we're going to still go over the tools, but if you don't know where these are in your own software, then you'll have to look them up. I am going to go over what the tools are we're going to be using the most. So the first one is going to be the paintbrush. If you look up here, this blue icon that's already selected, if I click on it, it opens up a menu of all the other brushes I can use. Okay, and that's what we're going to be starting with, is just the paintbrush tool, right? And it does what it sounds like, it paints. Okay, it's a paintbrush. Okay, that's probably the most common tool we're going to be using. That's how we're going to create our images, is by painting. Okay, the next tool on that list is right next to it. It's this blue one. Now it's blue, the smudge tool. Okay, and if I click on it, it will also give me the same options as the brushes for what I want to use to smudge. Okay, and the smudge tool is going to be what you use to sort of smudge things around that you want to change. So, right, if I come to over here to this layer, I can smudge what I've already painted without actually adding any new pigment or paint to my canvas. All right, and that's what the smudge tool does. Depending on what texture we pick to smudge with will depend on, how smooth or how nice of a soft blend or gradient we get. If I choose this really big soft brush, you could see that it blends things a lot smoother than if I were to use something like this charcoal block brush, which is going to give us a lot more of a rough textured sort of blend to it. Okay, the next thing on the list is our eraser tool, which is the opposite of the paintbrush. This is what we use to erase paint away. Okay, and if we click over here as well, we can see that there are lots of different options, just like the paintbrush and the smudge tool, for what we want to use to erase with. So if you use a hard edge brush, it'll erase hard, and if you use a soft one, it'll be soft. Okay? So the next tool is a color picker. If we go all the way over to the top right corner where this orange dot is, this is our color picker, and if we click on it, it's going to let us choose a different color to paint with than what we've already selected. We have these sliders down here which will change the hue, the saturation, and the lightness or darkness, or the brightness. Or we can just come up here to the square and drag it around wherever we want on there. Alright, so that's our color picker, and that's just going to change the color of our brush so that when we paint, we have a different pigment coming out onto the canvas. Okay? Another thing you can do with that, I should mention, is that if you click on the selected color or hold it down and drag it over to your canvas and let go, it'll fill with whatever color you've selected. Okay, so that's a useful tool as well. The next thing we're going to talk about is the layer menu. So a really important part of digital painting is going to be layers. The layers is these 2 little squares overlapping right here. If I click on it, it'll bring up the layer menu. And right now, all we have is our background and our first layer. If I push this plus sign, it's going to make a new layer, which will allow me to paint on top of the previous layer beneath it. Okay, and we'll go way in depth into layers later. But that's the layer menu, and then if you hit these check boxes, it's going to turn off each layer. And that's all you really need to know about layers for right now. Okay, the next one is going to be our sliders. Okay, our sliders are these things over here on the right side. On your screen, it might be on the left side, depending on how you have your interface set up. But these are going to be your brush size and your opacity sliders. Okay, if you hit this little box, you can slide it and move it up and down. This box in the middle here, I don't usually find the need to mess with that. And if you tap on it, it will bring up your color picker as well. Okay, so anyways, that is our color slider. If we do brush size, it will make our brush either really tiny, or if we make it large, it'll make it really big. And then same with the opacity. The lower we bring the opacity, the less paint will come out of our brush. So you can see it way down here, you can barely see it showing up. And the more opaque I make it, the more it will show up. All right, so those are our sliders. And then the last tool that we're going to be using is our selection tool and our lasso tool. Okay, they kind of go hand in hand. So a selection tool, if we just hit that, it's this arrow right up here. It looks like a keyboard mouse. Okay, if I hit that, it's going to select everything on the current layer, and I'll be able to select it and move it around, and then use these handles here in the corner to adjust things, its shape, right? Make how, skew, make it bigger or smaller, okay? And then the selection tool is if we want a specific part. So I can hit the lasso tool, I apologize. The lasso tool is if we want a specific part. So if we hit the lasso tool, we can come here and select only the parts we want of a specific layer, and then move those around by hitting our selection tool, and it will only move that portion. You can even cut through specific shapes and objects, like let's say we only want half of this blue shape, then we can hit our selection tool and we can move that around, readjust it, make it a little bit bigger, bring it back, and then drop it back down by hitting our selection tool a second time. Okay, this is going to be really useful when you're painting to be able to adjust things. You should also note at the very bottom, it shows freehand and automatic. Right now we have freehand selected, which means it will just do whatever our brush tells it to do. But if we select automatic, what it's going to do is select everything of that same color, right? It's like the auto select tool in Photoshop, right? If I hit automatic on this blue, it's going to hit everything that falls within that category, and if I slide across the screen, it's going to adjust the selection threshold, okay? Same with over here, we also have, if we hit the selection tool, we have freeform, which is what we have now. We can move it around freely however we want. It doesn't snap to anything. If we hit magnetic, what it's going to do is snap it to a grid. So you could see it's moving along this axis. I can't quite move it as freeform, right? It's not just going to be all over the place. Okay, so those are the main tools we're going to be using. That's all you really need to know to get started, and I'll see you guys in the next lecture.